Morning in Brisbane broke with deceptive normalcy as Hannah Clark buckled her 3 young children into their seats for the daily school run. Within minutes, that peace shattered. A neighbor, busy washing his car nearby, was suddenly paralyzed by the sound of her blood-curdling screams. A passing motorist witnessed a scene from a nightmare. Hannah, fully engulfed in flames, desperately trying to crawl from the driver's side. Someone rushed forward with an extinguisher, only to watch the vehicle erupt in a violent blast. Why was she crying for her babies? And who was the man standing over her, clutching cans of gasoline? Investigators quickly realized this was no tragic mechanical failure. This was a calculated act of malice, the horrific conclusion to a psychological war that had been intensifying for several years. Hannah Clark entered the world on September 8, 1988, in Brisbane, the beloved daughter of her devoted parents, Sue and Lloyd. She was a vibrant, high-energy child, possessed of a natural charisma that could effortlessly lift the spirits of everyone around her. Even in her youth, she felt a profound maternal pull and maintained an incredibly tight, protective bond with her younger brother. She instinctively stepped into the role of caregiver, acting more like a guardian than a typical older sibling. A natural athlete, Hannah became a powerhouse in trampoline gymnastics, competing at the state level by the age of 16. Her natural leadership shone during her senior year, when she was appointed school captain by her teachers and classmates. It was a position reserved strictly for those who commanded the genuine respect and admiration of their entire peer group. After graduation, she dedicated herself to youth mentorship, teaching gymnastics to local children at the Police Citizens Youth Club. At age 20, she encountered 31-year-old Rowan Baxter while working there. It was a meeting that would irrevocably alter her fate. Rowan, born May 9, 1977, in New Zealand, had been forged in an environment of constant domestic instability and chaos. His father's early prison sentence left a permanent, dark imprint on his psyche during his most formative years. Relatives would later describe Rowan as a volatile child who displayed a chilling and persistent streak of cruelty toward others. One cousin admitted to living in fear of him, attributing his behavior to a toxic family legacy of deep-seated misogyny. Despite a fractured upbringing, Rowan channeled his aggression into sports, seeking validation through physical dominance on the field. He played for Tanga Boys College before landing a contract with the New Zealand Warriors Rugby League in 2005. Though technically on the roster, he never saw official play, surviving on a meager $10,000 annual developmental contract. Nevertheless, he constantly branded himself a pro athlete, using the title to intimidate others and inflate his social standing. Those in his inner circle described a man obsessed with competition, pathologically controlling, and prone to explosive, unprovoked rage. He possessed a desperate, overpowering need to dominate everyone he met and could not handle any form of personal rejection. Before he ever set eyes on Hannah, Rowan had already been through a marriage that produced a young son. He wed at 18 to a girl of 16. By the time their son was 2, his domestic tyranny had become completely unbearable. His first wife finally reached a breaking point and attempted to sever ties with him to save herself, but Rowan refused to let her leave. He launched a campaign of terror, utilizing relentless stalking and psychological intimidation. In one dark episode, he claimed he had rigged his car with a hose, threatening a murder-suicide involving their toddler. Paralyzed by fear, she stayed. In 2008, Rowan's son happened to enroll in a gymnastics class taught by Hannah. That gym served as the backdrop for their first meeting, occurring while Rowan was still legally bound to his first wife. He pursued Hannah relentlessly, claiming his marriage was dead and that he only remained for his son's emotional well-being. Just a few months after their illicit affair began, the reality of his character began to surface. Rowan eventually divorced and moved out, yet his aggressive nature and need for total control never truly dissipated. He continued to bully his ex-wife over parenting disputes. 6 months into his relationship with Hannah, she discovered she was pregnant. While Hannah felt a deep, natural desire to keep the child, Rowan's reaction was cold and calculating. He pressured her into a termination, gaslighting the young woman into believing she was too immature for the burdens of motherhood. By October 2012, they were married. At the ceremony, Hannah was 14 weeks pregnant with their first child together. Following the wedding, Rowan ceased all child support for his first son. On April 10, 2013, their daughter Aaliyah was born. Aaliyah was a vivid, expressive child who possessed a sharp moral compass and a deep, early love for reading. Even as a toddler, she recognized the toxic way her father treated her mother and frequently dared to challenge him. In January 2015, Driven by their obsession with fitness, the couple opened a business they called Integrate Gym. Although Hannah's parents provided significant funding, the business struggled daily to stay afloat under Rowan's erratic management. Amidst this mounting financial and domestic pressure, their second daughter, Laianah, was born on March 19, 2015. She moved through the home with a quiet, soothing grace, frequently stepping in to settle the rising storms between family members. A striking image of her mother, the girl often tried to pacify her father's volatile moods. Their family grew again on December 4, 2016, with the birth of their youngest, Trey. Little Trey was practically an extension of his mother, though he possessed an untamed energy for running and discovery. Yet, he was always his happiest when tucked by her side. As the years crawled by, Rowan's psychological grip became increasingly restrictive and aggressive. His fixation on Hannah deepened, evolving into a suffocating and absolute brand of possessiveness. He methodically stripped away her digital autonomy, forcing her onto a shared social media profile while forbidding her from having any private online presence. One by one, he severed the threads connecting her to her relatives, effectively isolating her. This calculated dominance soon began to shadow the children as well. If their toys weren't put away with immediate precision, he would simply toss their belongings into the trash. He weaponized their favorite activities, canceling them just to inflict pain on Hannah. Following one particularly bitter clash, Rowan fled the house, leaving the children in tears. In the wreckage of that argument, Hannah reached out to her mother for emotional support. Rowan later confronted her, reciting that private call word for word with chilling accuracy. He later told a colleague he had accidentally left his phone running to capture the audio. That admission immediately unsettled the coworker. They warned him that covertly recording his wife was a serious violation, but Rowan merely shrugged off the concern. He also dictated the terms of their intimacy, demanding total daily compliance. Any rejection was met with a barrage of psychological warfare that made her life a misery. During one terrifying outburst, he pulverized her wristwatch in a fit of rage before storming out. Paralyzed by the thought that he might end his life, Hannah contacted her mother in a state of pure panic. Her parents spent the night scouring Brisbane for him. When he finally surfaced, he claimed he had been sitting in a church parking lot, contemplating suicide. By November 2019, Hannah's endurance had finally shattered. She knew she had to disappear. She sought counsel from a domestic violence support group, detailing her terror and the lethal uncertainty of planning an escape. She lived under the constant shadow of his surveillance. With professional guidance, she began meticulously mapping out a way to break free. That December, the plan was finally set into motion. Carrying only the barest essentials, she grabbed Aaliyah from school and drove straight to a friend's house, ditching her phone to evade his digital tracking. Within 24 hours, she had sought sanctuary within the safety of her parents' walls. On December 4th, Rowan reached out to a family advocacy group known as Relationships Australia. They scheduled a session for the 10th, which he ignored. 10 days later, on December 14th, he confessed to his doctor that his wife had fled with the children. He broke down in a display of weeping remorse, acknowledging that his need for control had finally destroyed his family. He returned for a mental health check on December 16th and walked away with a prescription for Mazepam to treat his chronic insomnia. Meanwhile, the legal clock was starting to tick. On December 6th, Hannah had gone to the police. Investigators there urged her to file a formal protection order against her husband. She hesitated, however, haunted by the fear that legal papers would only push him over the edge. Despite the trauma, she kept the line of communication open, hoping to maintain some semblance of a relationship between the kids and their father. He used that access to manipulate her, gaslighting her into believing that her departure was causing the children irreparable psychological harm. He also began a campaign to convince her parents she was mentally unstable, painting himself as the victim in a grueling cycle of deception. Rowan would frequently promise to bring the children home, only to rescind the offer at the very last second. This constant uncertainty kept Hannah in a state of high-alert panic. His harassment intensified, echoing the dark patterns of his first marriage. He began appearing like a ghost, letting himself into her parents' house and stalking her every move. On December 26, 2019, he was scheduled to drop the children back after a day out. When Hannah stepped out to meet them, he suddenly shoved Laianah into the passenger seat and sped off into the distance. A witness to the abduction immediately alerted a passing patrol car. Officers interviewed Hannah, but they were legally hamstrung without a formal custody agreement. Lacking the authority to seize the child, they checked his residence. but Rowan had already vanished with the girl. Later that evening, he initiated a video call to Hannah, delivering a cold ultimatum. He declared that Laianah would only be returned if Hannah admitted to a fabricated affair. Pushed to her breaking point, Hannah contacted her attorney, who drafted an urgent legal demand for the child's immediate return. As his behavior became increasingly erratic, the police took the initiative to file a domestic violence order on Hannah's behalf, regardless of her fears. Law enforcement eventually cornered Rowan at his house, catching him just as he was forcing Laianah back into his vehicle. Officials served him with the judicial mandate, enforcing a 300-foot exclusion zone around the mother and children pending a final custody determination. Law enforcement assumed temporary custody of the young girl, facilitating her immediate return to her mother's side. The father faced a strict communication blackout until their scheduled court date on January 4, 2020. A routine safety inspection revealed visible signs of distress and fear in the child's demeanor. Following the kidnapping incident, a profound terror took root. She clung to her mother, paralyzed by the thought of being apart. Though investigators recommended psychological intervention at specialized clinics, the formal referral process stalled before any sessions took place. The victim drafted an exhaustive account, documenting the systematic cycle of violence she had endured. Her testimony detailed a nightly ritual of coerced intimacy paired with relentless psychological belittlement. He weaponized language to dehumanize her, utilizing vile metaphors to strip away her remaining dignity. Fears for her survival were validated by his chilling admission, a premeditated blueprint for a murder-suicide involving his previous family. This revelation cast a shadow of imminent doom, as she realized she and the children were likely his next targets. Digital footprints further exposed his volatility, with disturbing content surfacing across his online profiles. Video archives depicted him engaging in aggressive physical play that frequently escalated into genuine physical assault against the minors. A particularly harrowing recording captured him submerging the sobbing toddler in freezing water against his will. Nevertheless, he maintained a calculated campaign of gaslighting, reshaping the narrative to cast himself as the victim. While her allegations reached authorities, he preemptively filed reports claiming he was living in fear of her aggression. On December 29, 2019, he initiated therapy under the guise of self-improvement. Clinical observations later revealed he confessed to obsessive jealousy and conceded that his stifling dominance had driven her away. Crucially, no comprehensive evaluation of his potential for lethal domestic escalation was ever performed. Therapy remained superficial, prioritizing basic stress management over the grave reality of his predatory behavior. Assessments indicated mild psychological instability, yet he successfully masked any violent intent during the interview. By New Year's Eve, he was back in the clinician's office, disclosing the newly active restraining order. He dismissed the allegations as pure fabrication, performing a role of the devastated father denied access to his offspring. The dialogue centered on his personal grief, effectively centering the abuser's feelings in the clinical narrative. Once more, the system failed to screen for the lethal danger he posed to his family. He maintained his therapeutic facade, returning for another appointment on January 6th. He vented about the closure of their business, projecting blame onto her for exposing the truth and tarnishing his image. Despite the red flags, he pushed for shared parental rights and split living arrangements. No danger profile was created. Instead, they discussed hobbies. By January 8th, the legal battle moved to a courtroom. He fought the protective mandate, but the judiciary ultimately prioritized her safety over his objections. The judge's decree explicitly prohibited any further acts of aggression or intimidation against his kin. It enforced a strict 300-foot boundary and restricted communication solely to essential parenting logistics. Undeterred by the ruling, he consulted a specialized legal firm on January 17th to strategize his next move. He alleged he was the victim of parental alienation, claiming she planned to disappear with the children forever. His physical presence became a haunting constant, appearing at her local haunts with predatory frequency. These run-ins were too precise. She suspected her vehicle had been compromised by a hidden tracking device. The surveillance escalated following his January 21st therapy session, suggesting a darkening obsession. He complained to his counselor that he was being pathologized as a tactic to sever his parental ties. Fixated on dismantling the legal barriers protecting his family, his counsel filed a motion asserting the restraining order was merely a chess move in a custody war. On January 23rd, the final verdict awarded her primary care while granting him visitation every other weekend. The schedule mandated brief overnight stays and digital check-ins, alongside a split holiday rotation. Handoffs occurred at the maternal grandparents' residence, yet the children's anxiety remained palpable despite these safeguards. Aaliyah, in particular, showed a visceral reluctance to engage in these mandatory visitations. A tearful phone call from the daughter during a visit signaled a brewing crisis. They were in transit to an unknown destination. On January 31st, Rowan failed to return Trey by the scheduled hour. While unfastening her son's seatbelt, Hannah discovered suggestive photographs of herself, strategically placed to be found. Visibly rattled, she seized the pictures and retreated toward the house. Rowan suddenly intercepted her, pinning her wrist behind her back. Hannah's mother, witnessing the assault, contacted emergency services. Denying any wrongdoing, Rowan attempted a retaliatory move by filing a restraining order against Hannah. Medical professionals later diagnosed a sprain, stabilizing Hannah's injured wrist with a medical splint. She filed reports for assault and protection order violations. Upon questioning, Rowan remained silent, demanding legal counsel. Simultaneously, Rowan's personal life began its final descent. His employment as a trainer ended. Hannah's counsel informed his representatives that the recent violence had consequences. The custody arrangement was terminated, effectively severing Rowan's access to his 3 children. Consumed by fury, he adopted a victim complex. This refusal to accept accountability fueled a toxic resentment. Though he breached the court order, authorities issued a court summons rather than making an arrest. He faced charges for the physical assault. February 17th saw Rowan purchasing restraints, a fuel canister, and industrial solvents at a hardware store. Within 24 hours, he filled that 5-liter container with volatile gasoline. Chillingly, he also bought 3 chocolate eggs and several candies during the same trip. At 3:28 p.m. on February 18th, he inquired about men's support, repeating the call 30 minutes later. By 6:25 p.m., he was sobbing to a friend, claiming he was being kept from his children. During the nightly video call, Rowan remained silent, his figure framed only by steady, wordless tears. Intuition struck Hannah with a cold, terrifying realization that an imminent threat was looming. She discussed drafting a will with her mother, fearing Rowan's potential for lethal violence. She worried about who would raise the kids after his imprisonment. Friends heard her chilling predictions. Those dark premonitions were on the verge of manifestation. February 19, 2020, began with their standard morning ritual at the local gymnasium. By 6:20 a.m., Hannah returned home briefly before leaving to secure morning beverages for them. She sat comfortably on her mother's bed, sharing a quiet moment as the workday approached. At 7:20 a.m., Sue offered a final, unknowing goodbye to her daughter and grandchildren. Hannah secured her 3 children in the vehicle, preparing for the morning school run. Trey was harnessed in the center seat, flanked by Laianah on the passenger side. The engine sparked to life just as Rowan materialized, forcing his way into the car. Brandishing a fuel container, he ordered her to drive. Panic-stricken, Hannah demanded he vacate the vehicle. She barely cleared the driveway before spotting a neighbor. She screamed for him to call police. She screamed that he was dousing her in fuel. The witness saw Rowan physically restraining her. Despite her struggle, Rowan maintained a chilling, calculated composure. He exerted total control until Hannah briefly escaped the cabin. However, time had already run out. The accelerant was already lit. An inferno engulfed the car, consuming everything inside as a neighbor rushed forward. He commanded her to roll while frantically deploying his garden hose to dampen the flames. After dousing the fire on Hannah, he redirected the stream toward the burning attacker. Rowan's clothing was alight. Midst the agony, Hannah's only thoughts were for her trapped children. Realizing the gravity, the neighbor called for help. A bystander named Samantha soon arrived on scene. Noticing a column of dense smoke, she had diverted her vehicle toward the wreckage. Samantha assisted with the hose while offering psychological support as first responders raced to the address. Despite her critical injuries, Hannah pleaded for news regarding her 3 children. Carrie Fernandez, a neighbor, heard the agonizing screams the moment she spotted the vehicle engulfed in flames. She contacted dispatch immediately, providing a play-by-play account as the nightmare transitioned into reality. Seconds later, the vehicle erupted into an all-consuming wall of fire. Arming herself with an extinguisher, Carrie raced toward the wreckage in a desperate struggle to suppress the inferno. The radiating heat caused the chassis to drift backward, forcing terrified onlookers to scream for her to retreat. Collapsing under the weight of the horror, Hannah's voice fractured as she cried out for her lost children. Investigators eventually discovered that Rowan had positioned fuel-laden containers directly at Aaliyah's feet, ensuring the blast originated at the child's seat. While the father remained dry, he had meticulously doused the mother and children. As the furnace intensified, Rowan suddenly lunged back into the heart of the burning car. For a fleeting moment, witnesses hoped he was reaching in to pull the young ones from the pyre, but he emerged clutching a different object instead. Onlookers quickly identified the cold gleam of a knife. Sensing the shift in danger, a witness shouted a warning to Carrie Fernandez, who was still battling the flames. She backed away as the armed man positioned himself for his concluding act of violence. Without hesitation, Rowan knelt, drove the blade into his own chest, and fell forward. He died on the asphalt shortly after. The devastation left in his wake was permanent. Within one morning, he had stolen the futures of his 3 children. Aaliyah, Laianah, and Trey perished, while Hannah was left with severe thermal trauma across 90% of her body. Even as paramedics swarmed the site, the mother's only concern was her babies. She kept begging for news of their safety. She asked if anyone had saved them, but the responders' silent gazes held a truth that no words could soften. They urged her to focus on her own breathing, knowing her window of lucidity was closing as her body failed. In a final surge of strength, Hannah dialed her father, but Lloyd Clark answered only to hear a haunting silence. Assuming it was a pocket dial from a grandchild, he ended the call, unaware of the tragedy unfolding miles away. He would later learn that his daughter was making one last, silent attempt to reach him before losing her voice. At 4:50 in the afternoon, Hannah followed her children. The final member of the family had been lost. After his death, a chilling digital manifesto was found on Rowan's phone regarding a game he intended to finish. He claimed he was done playing, suggesting that no one could manipulate a life and expect no consequences. He wrote that he had told the kids she loved them before the autopsies revealed the clinical horror of the scene. Hannah succumbed to systemic organ failure, a direct result of the catastrophic burns she had endured. 6-year-old Aaliyah was fully consumed by the fire. Her blood contained lethal levels of carbon monoxide, yet that wasn't the killer. The forensic data suggests the child was still conscious when the flames finally overtook her. 4-year-old Laianah died from a lethal combination of smoke inhalation and the physical trauma caused by the blaze. Young Trey met the same agonizing end. Rowan, who took his own life, had no drugs or alcohol in his system. His brain showed no physical defects, confirming his actions were not a mental break, but a cold, calculated choice. The events of February 19, 2020, sparked a wave of communal mourning and national outrage across Australia. For the public, the case stripped away the mask of a hidden, systemic danger. It exposed the reality of coercive control, a psychological warfare Rowan had used for years that the law failed to recognize. On March 9, 2020, Hannah and her 3 children were laid to rest together in a single coffin. Overwhelmed by the loss, her brother offered a final, heartbreaking apology for his inability to shield them from the dark. If this investigation into human darkness moved you, please like the video and subscribe for more in-depth cases. We deliver nightly profiles on true crime. Until our next deep dive, stay observant and stay vigilant. The story of Hannah Clark and her 3 children is a haunting siren call for a world that too often looks the other way. Behind the deceptive normalcy of suburban life, a silent, psychological war is often being waged, one that doesn't always leave a bruise, but always leaves a scar. The most vital lesson we must carry forward is the recognition of coercive control. Abuse is not merely a physical act, it is a calculated siege on a human soul. It is the monitoring of a phone, the isolation from family, and the weaponization of children's love. When protection turns into possession, and care turns into a cage, it is not love, it is a lethal predator. Hannah's premonitions were a desperate map of a tragedy already in motion. We owe it to the stolen futures of Aaliyah, Laianah, and Trey to be more than just observers. We must sharpen our collective intuition. We must demand a legal system that recognizes the invisible chains of psychological warfare before the smoke begins to rise. Let this be our wake-up call. Believe the victims. Listen to the silences. Trust the fear. In the fight against domestic tyranny, your vigilance is the only shield that can break the cycle. Stay observant. Stay brave. Choose to see.